Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 84 of the Home Games Podcast. I'm Yazeed, and this is Joseph.
Hello, I'm Joseph, and today is Tuesday, June 22nd, 2021. Today, for Home Game stuff, we are talking about searching tags, and then some work on Homedome, which is the software testing service. I'm realizing is kind of what it is. And then some plans for Yazeed's Who Tweeted That Tweet game.
That's right. You brought up a funny point when we were talking a little bit before we'll call it the pre-show, but really it's the part of the show where you and I hang out and then we start the podcast. This might be our first real design doc for something Home Games related, which is exciting. And this is actually like one of my first design docs, so it's pretty nice. Really high quality mock too. You could call me a UX engineer.
UX engineer. That's a new title too. Never heard that one, but I like it.
I'm just making them up as I go, honestly.
That's kind of the vibe of this entire project, so I like it. But yeah, no, I do think that is the first official design document. Like, we've had plans and stuff written down, but nothing with, I guess it's a UI design document. It's not like a system architecture design or anything like that. So that'll be a real upgrade. That's how we'll know what we've made it as engineers.
Honestly, dude, just take pictures of your whiteboard. You're like, I have everything written down on my whiteboard, but it's like, oh, well, I only can access that if I'm wearing my glasses and you have your camera on and there's no glare.
Yeah, I thought about for the custom artwork on each episode of the podcast, I thought of taking the picture of my whiteboard and then just making that the artwork every time. But then that kind of puts a weird pressure on me to have interesting, cool things on the whiteboard. And then I was already thinking, like, maybe I could add like little doodles and like little images, and then maybe at some point I'll add little Easter eggs and hints and stuff. And I was like, nope, I can't trust myself with that kind of responsibility. I'll mess it up.
Dude, that kind of responsibility I don't like. Like where I work, we do deployment emails that we send out to the whole company. And one of the teams, the dude there who does the deployment emails, throws in like a fun fact in all of them. And they're always like actually quite interesting.
Yeah.
And they asked me if I wanted to do those emails. And I was like, no, I'm not competing with that.
Yeah, because one day you'll send out a fact that isn't so fun. It's just like, man, remember that one bad email, and it'll just loom over your head the entirety of your career.
No, I was telling, we launched like a big thing this week. So I was telling that when we put out the email, we should say, "Dearly beloved, we're gathered here today to celebrate the birth of a new product," or something like just absolutely wild. And they were just like, I don't know if we can do that as like a whole company email. I was like, what are they going to do? Arrest us? And they're like, I don't want to find out.
I'm just writing here in my notes to not put you on the Home Games marketing team if we ever decide to get that going. What do you
mean? I'm funny to at least me.
It's true.
All that stuff aside, so this week I put out a flow chart of the UI for the Who Tweeted That Tweet game. Before the show started, Justin and I kind of walked through it. It'd be awkward to do it for audio only listeners, so there's that. Maybe I will post it on Twitter later.
Maybe we can do like a YouTube type thing. We could do some other form of content, like especially for it.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing too is it's in a Google presentation. So if somebody wanted to, they could just go through the Google presentation. There's no additional notes on there, so you'd be a little confused. But basically, it's just a walkthrough for the two types of players: the host player, which is the first person, the person who creates the game instance, and then the additional players on top of it. It kind of walks through that process of like, I'm a new player, I need to add my Twitter handle, I need to add my screen name. Do I get to add additional Twitter handles, or am I just chilling waiting for the host to say green light? And then from there, it's like, how does this game play out? Like, where's the tweet located on the screen? How all that stuff. Like, it basically just like lays out all those things. And then Joseph raised some interesting things as well. One of the things that I was going to bring up on the podcast is the opting in on sensitive content. Just brought up a really interesting point about Twitter. And this, I think, will affect us on pretty much every like social media tie-in that we do. But most of them do have like a sensitive content warning. Like, I think like YouTube, if you mark your stuff as sensitive content, you have to sign in, right? in order to see it. And you have to be like, I have an 18 plus account or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's true about Twitch. They give you like a warning. I have no idea about Facebook or Insta.
Well, and I
don't
think
know if
just
Snapchat
on
allows it.
yeah, Instagram doesn't allow porn.
Oh.
No, but Twitter does. And Twitter, like if you're logged in and you have it checked, like, oh, I'm okay with sensitive content, that's one thing. But I do think, and again, this kind of goes back to something we've talked about several times, which is like laws. I think on a legal level that if we show porn to someone who is not 18, then we could get in trouble for that. So we would have to have some sort of way to basically filter, even on Pico de Gallo, for example, if we have who tweeted that tweet on like demoable on Pico de Gallo, and someone goes and plays it and they share a link with their friend, and then their friend happens to be 14 or whatever, and then it's like, oh look, here's some butts or whatever on Twitter, then that's like probably bad. So yeah, that's just something to consider, I think, before we start. But that's for images and stuff. Text, we're not going to have that problem, because as far as I know, there's nothing you can tweet that's just text that Twitter is like, holy shit, you can't see this, Listen, maybe there is. I actually don't know.
ASCII art exists. I'll say to that.
Yeah, just 8 = D. It's just ruins everything.
Yeah. But at any rate, I do think we do need to add that opt-in for each player. So I'll probably go through the mocks and I'll redo them. And then if any player has opted out of seeing sensitive content, any sensitive content, I don't remember from the Twitter API if they're like, yo, by the way, this is sensitive content. I really hope they do tell you like, this may be sensitive, in like a flag that they give back to you with the like tweets list. So.
But even if it's not, I don't think that needs to be in like the V1 of the game. I think kind of keeping in spirit with the like 3 games in 4 quarters thing,
Yeah. Well, so the reason I do want to add it in is for the Pico de Gallo reason, because we do want to add these games to Pico de Gallo.
But we won't have images, at least in the V1, right? We would just have text. So we would add filters for stuff that we wouldn't even show in the first place.
This true. You right.
So I would say that could be like a V2 iteration thing, or maybe revisit it like next year or something. Because I do think that Twitter integration is going to take a lot more time than you or I are even thinking of at the moment. And that kind of goes into maybe something I'll talk about later, which is just kind of having API integrations and network requests, and what does that look like within home games and all that kind of stuff. But I'll probably talk about that later with my Homedome stuff.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much all for me. Everything else was just like very specific and probably more focused on like a V2 version or a cleaned up version. So yeah, that's this was like my big update from this week, was just sitting down and ironing out what I was thinking about for the UI for who tweeted that tweet, which is nice.
Cool.
But yeah.
Awesome. For me, I had a couple of things. Most of them, I guess, one of them is Homedome, and the other stuff is just, I guess, websites in like the website UI in general. So I added a search for tags on the website. So like I had said the previous episode, I added a search for games. So I can search for the title of a game, the author of a game, that kind of stuff. And at the time, I also had tags, like the concept of a tag, but I didn't have the ability to search for tags. And so that was a quick thing I added to the website, where now when you search, it makes 2 requests, one for searching games, one for searching tags. I thought for a little bit about combining that into one, where basically you make one request to landlord and it makes the both requests like for you and kind of abstracts that it's 2 things thing. But I actually don't like that, because they are separate entities. Like games are separate from tags, and they exist in separate Elasticsearch indexes, and they should be accessed separately. And I don't like the idea of the server side making assumptions about what the client wants. It's in a world where like you have a GraphQL server or something like that, where you have all these data sources on the back end, and maybe you don't really care or know what the client wants, but they can just say that they want X, Y, and Z, and you kind of magically only get X, Y, Z. That's really nice. But you're still, depending on how you implement that, you're still probably accessing 2 separate resources in your actual handlers or whatever they're called in GraphQL. What whatever the name is for that. You probably know.
Resolvers.
Resolvers, yeah. But in a REST API, which is what we have, I don't think GraphQL is the right solution here. In a REST API like this, I just, you have 2 resources, make 2 requests. I think that's reasonable. So anyway, I have the bullet point here that the UI is atrocious. I've been saying for the longest time, it's like this whole whiteboard behind me is basically clean up the fucking website, and then the next note is the same thing but with just more anger behind it. So like I have buttons that are buttons and don't link to anything, and or like don't have any action when you click them and stuff like that. It's just kind of nasty. So I need to go back and revisit that once the approval process stuff that I have is done, which is where Homedome comes in. Do you have any questions about the tag search stuff I just said?
No, one of the things I found... Ooh, sorry, people who just heard that. One of the things that I find interesting is that tags has to be its own separate search index.
Yeah, so a game has an ID, it has an author, it has a name, it has a created date, it has an updated date, it has a last published version, which points to a game version object or entity that's not a game. It has a set of data that is related to the game, which is separate from a tag, which is basically the association of a word to a game by a player. So it's really 3 things that are important. If you have a tag ID, game ID, and user ID, right? And if you had a relational database, these would probably point to 3 separate tables. And then this user tag would probably be just one table with the 3 ID columns in total, and have no other attributes besides that, besides maybe like a created date. So someone can say, this is when you created this tag. Anyway, I guess my point is that they are separate entities, and we do not have a relational database. We just have these Elasticsearch indexes, these kind of buckets of searchable things, and they have keys that you can say are like keywords, so you can search by these keys. But if we wanted to have them all in one index, we would have to essentially have the tag text associated with the same thing that the game name text is associated with, and there just isn't really a way that makes sense on like a data modeling perspective to have all of that stuff good and like easily searchable, at least in the way that I have it set up now. You know what I mean? Like maybe I can completely restructure it and make that make sense, but at least not with the way that I've modeled games and tags at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, that makes sense. Does it cost you any extra to add an additional index like that, or no?
I don't think I'm charged per index on Elasticsearch. I believe it's just the instance type and how long it's running. So that's basically the same throughout the month, regardless of how many indexes I have, or indices. I don't know what the word is.
Cool. Thank you. No more questions from me, Your Honor.
Cool. I had one thing about the website also. So I was thinking about, again, this publishing workflow where someone says, basically I have a game and I want to publish a new version of it and make it available. In that process, they're just putting in GitHub info, and we're only supporting GitHub, at least at the moment, which means it's a repo owner, a repo name, and then a commit. So I think it might make sense to just integrate the website with GitHub and then have like a list of like a given, basically we can fetch your repos and then that can fetch the commit list, and you can kind of just select from that list instead of having to copy paste from GitHub, which is a simple idea I thought of. Like I don't know if that would be a better experience or what. I just think it might be possible and better if we integrated the homegames.io website with GitHub to make the publishing workflow easier, where people can just get their GitHub info directly. Don't know how reasonable that would be, but it was just something.
Sounds like we're gonna need some CI.
Well, not like I don't even know what that would look like. I would just imagine we would add a GitHub client package or something to our website, and then have some magic guts that call all of the APIs for GitHub. But again, I didn't really look into this. It was just like a 2-minute thing where I thought that would be a good idea, so I thought I would mention it.
Would it be too late in the game to suggest maybe an NPM style?
What do you
flow.
mean?
Like how npm is like a library of packages. We create like a command line tool for like, here's how you like init a game. Here's how you like tie it all together. Like this is like our suggested flow.
Where you would publish a game like to npm, and then we would just say
well,
like,
you wouldn't publish to npm. You'd publish to like our services, but it would be similar to publishing to npm, if that makes sense.
well,
Like, would that clean up a little bit of the difficulty around the GitHub integration? Like, to skirt around it by saying, like, no, you put... Ooh, sorry, this is, like, closer than it normally is to me. You push this... You are like, I would like to push this to NPM. Or, like, not NPM. I want to push this code to GitHub. To home games. I would like to push this code to home games. And then from there, it takes all that info and it does it on its own via like a command line tool. I don't know if that's easier or better, but that is something I wanted to put out there.
The idea when integrating with GitHub, at least for me in the beginning, was that I wanted to have some sort of trust of what they were giving us. I didn't want someone to just give me a zip file with like, anything in it, and then have my stuff try to parse that. So I figure at least code being publicly available on GitHub as like a prerequisite for putting anything up on home games would kind of filter out a lot of that super bottom tier garbage that we might get from people just putting anything on the internet. And there might be other benefits that can give us in the future if we're actually integrated with an actual service like that, where we could, for example, have like a nice user interface that makes it kind of more seamless to publish your stuff like that. But I don't know how valuable or important that is, or if we can kind of generalize that and integrate with like GitLab and Bitbucket and whatever else, And I don't know how valuable that would be. It's just kind of something to think about. But I do want to have some sort of intermediary thing there between us and the actual stuff people give us, and I want it to be publicly traceable, because if someone uploading a zip file, there's no record of that outside of what we build.
That makes sense. Yeah. Okay, cool. I like that.
Cool. So yeah, my next thing, my biggest major thing was Homedome. So did you have any other questions on stuff or comments or anything like that?
No, I don't. I think that it would be better to pick GitHub over Bitbucket or GitLab.
Oh yeah,
and
definitely.
Just say like, use GitHub, please.
Yeah, definitely is like a V1 that would be the case. But I'm saying building a UI for that, if you're integrating with GitHub, do you build a user interface that is kind of I don't know the word, or I'm blanking on the word, but basically doesn't care about what it's talking to behind, kind of like an actual interface in code where it doesn't care about the implementation. So maybe the UI is accessing GitHub or GitLab or Bitbucket, and the user can pick either one. It's just a generic interface to pull that data in. Like, do we build a UI with that in mind, or do we build a UI thinking like, oh, it'll always be GitHub? And that's kind of what I've been working with so far. So again, just something to think about. I don't think it's important just to do anything about that right now, because again, like we've come back to so many times, it's two of us and there's a lot of stuff to do. So anything that's not like super critical, I don't want to spend time on.
Yeah, no, sorry. What I meant by that is I would rather us never not in. I would rather us only integrate with GitHub and to leave the other services, because I've seen some questionable stuff on some of the other services. What I'll say.
Well, I even outside of those, I mean, imagine a day where someone can just upload code. I don't know, maybe there's a competitor to GitHub that comes up that's cool, or maybe there's some other sort of system that we want to integrate with that's outside of just standard source control, service hosting, stuff like that. I don't know, just kind of thinking generally, but I don't really have any solid plans for that.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I have no more questions.
Okay, cool. So Homedome, which for those unfamiliar, again, just I guess kind of real quick before I start talking about this specifically, I'll say it's funny the way that this stuff is, because we have a need for a thing. We like run into a problem that we didn't know we had. For example, HTTPS and needing to generate certs, or whatever. There's several examples. But I start building it, or this hasn't been my thing. I start building it, and I realize eventually what it actually is, and it's not something I thought I would be building, but it kind of felt like I was building an antivirus when I was doing the Homedome stuff, because it's kind of what it is. I'm building a thing where, like I was just talking about, where you can give code and we need to verify it's not bad. There's several layers of what that means, but one of the deeper layers, or not so deep layers, depending on if you're starting from the bottom or the top, whatever, is this malicious JavaScript? There's a lot of questions you have to answer before that, like, is this code? Is this JavaScript? Does this work with home games? And then the question, is this malicious JavaScript, is kind of an ambiguous thing, because you have to define what malicious is, and that would have to be breaking some sort of rules that you and I haven't defined yet, and what does that mean? Building software that can determine that. So
it does sound very similar to an antivirus.
Yeah, and I don't know how antiviruses work. I just know it's like an index of things, and probably just runs like checksums of files or some shit. I don't really know.
I don't think it just runs checksums. I don't think it's like, these checksums match up, then you're good.
It just prompts the user, like, do you think there are viruses? Yes or no. It's like, all right, well, they said no. No, anyway, okay, so the question is this malicious JavaScript. So the two things I'm thinking right now, or I guess whatever. The worst case scenario is someone says, I'm going to write a game, and that game is going to go through your password files or whatever, know some sensitive data on your thing, like maybe your Twitter API key from your Twitter stuff that we've integrated with. Maybe it can access that Twitter API key, and maybe it can send it off to some other server that we don't know about. And that's like one of the worst things that can happen here. So how do we avoid that? One of them would be making sure they're not accessing the file system, and the other thing would be making sure that they're not making network requests. And then if you think about it, that we can't actually do that, because the games that they make will need to access the file system in the sense that they will be files that will be they will have files that reference other files, and that will be the file system, and they will be making, if they're integrating with Twitter, then they're making network requests. So it's not so general. We have to like kind of nail in deeper what that really means. What is malicious? What is a malicious network request? And so for file system access, what we talked about in the previous episode was basically, you can make sure that someone doesn't have a string in their code that says const fs equals require fs. And that'll probably take care of a couple of cases of that. But if someone really wanted to do the file system access stuff, they can just write the code that FS has. They can just do some other thing, because at the end of the day, they're just calling libraries that they have access to that aren't just FS. And so I started reading the FS source code just to have some familiarity with what that read method actually looked like underneath. And it's written in TypeScript, like the FS module is written in TypeScript.
I think quite a bit of Node has moved over to TypeScript. Just
makes sense. It seems to be a pretty popular thing. I'm kind of familiar with it. Like, I've read it before. Kind of like Spanish. I can read it. I just don't really write it or speak it.
I did not know you could read Spanish. That's news to me.
Me neither. Till recently, I read a Spanish sentence and I understood it, and I was like, holy shit, I think I know Spanish. Anyway,
it's all the Gears of War.
Yeah, that ranked Gears. I got banned from Gears for life, or not for life, by the way, but I'm like banned. Anyway, not important. But FS source code, it's one of those things where, I don't know if you have this kind of thing, but basically when you go to popular source code repositories, like open source code repositories, and you start to try to figure out how they work, and you're reading abstractions and abstractions, and it's so abstracted to the point where you don't know where to find the code. And I went through like 3 different modules, and I felt like having an IDE for TypeScript would have been helpful to like be able to click through things. And I think GitHub has it in the web UI to be able to click into stuff and find references to stuff. But I basically was just clicking through things trying to find out where the logic was, and then I realized it was kind of a fool's errand anyway, because you can just find a way around this specific thing and just do it in a different way, in a way that's harder for me to understand or see. It's not like observable to me or whatever. So I realized I needed to have a tool outside of Node completely. I just needed to look at what your process was doing. Again, file system and network stuff. So I don't know if you're familiar with strace, but it is a command line tool on Linux that you can use to basically show system calls made by a certain process. So you can, for example, say strace, echo hello world, and it'll show you all of the system, like the Linux system calls made in the process of echo hello world, showing hello world on the screen.
That's sick.
Yeah, and it requires pseudo access and stuff because it's probably the lowest level you can get. Our friend Connor showed it to me a few years ago. I don't remember why he was doing it, but basically it required me to put in my password for the command that he was doing, and strace showed my plain text password. So it's like that level of everything. You just see everything. Anyway, so Connor I think still knows my password, but anyway. I think what I need to do is write a thing that can parse strace output when looking at the process that is basically Homegame's run your game. And it'll say, okay, well, this game tried to make a network request. It tried to access this file. And I can do that by looking at the system calls that I know it would have to make like a TCP connection, like a socket open connection, like whatever, that type of call. I can read those and know that it is trying to do that. And then I would need to build something that can distinguish that from a call to an actual like authorized API that we provide. And then I would need to be able to gate that at some point in the future. Again, these are like in the future. I'm just kind of thinking about what it needs to be.
Yeah. That sounds wild. I was going to also put out there, I'm sorry, like every time I feel like we talk about this, I add more work to you on this piece specifically because I just think of something.
Yeah.
What happens if you need to meet a specific requirement in the game for them to do it? Say you make Tetris.
Okay.
And you write it in such a way that when a line of blocks gets cleared, that's when it reads and fires. Would strace be able to capture that? Or would we have to do static code analysis?
Yeah, so this is a really good question. So basically another part of this we would have to build maybe is something that can like a contract basically to test, and this is kind of this is something outside of just this part. It's kind of a general thing that we should have anyway, but it is, if you're going to put up a game, it should be able to test this basic thing. We have a basic contract that your game will do XYZ, and maybe we can structure things in a way so they're dependencies need to be like mockable, or I'm not familiar with like JavaScript mocking and stuff like that, but in Java, for example, you have service dependencies that you can mock, and in a test you can say, well, I'm not going to make real calls with these things, I'm just going to make fake calls, and this is what I would expect in this scenario, like fake response, and then test the logic from there. So maybe we have some sort of way to swap out the network calls with fake ones, and then test kind of with dummy data, and then in that manual review process we make sure it's not a virus. I don't know, there's something we can do there, but we do need to have some sort of thing to execute certain parts of the game to make sure that you're not hiding a network call in some weird interaction, like if they click the 7th pixel 6 times.
Yeah, I was gonna say, if you wanted to look at a JavaScript testing library, there's something called Jest, which is what I use, JEST. I've used in the past and used for work. That's like, that does have mocking functions. So you can mock like your own functions. You can mock like dependency functions. You can mock like anything you want in there. You can pass in dummy data, whatever.
And I guess what I'm saying that because like our assets, like the change to assets, the thing I was talking about with at the moment, anybody can just say any URL is their thing, and then our data, our game will fetch that URL, and it could be anything, and that's not good. So what we need to do is have them declare assets in a way that we can read statically, And so then we can say, okay, well, all these things that they declare that they're going to use, we can process outside of the game running, and then know that they're kind of authorized and whatever. And then when the game is running, you can only access the stuff that we've already checked, you know. And it would be kind of like that, I guess, with the network calls. You would have to kind of declare the calls that you will make, and then our stuff can check against that and say, okay, well, these calls will be good to make, but until this is approved, you cannot make them. You know?
Yeah.
You'll just get fake data back.
Mm-hmm. That'd be pretty cool. I kind of like that. Yeah, I think this is going to be like a tricky thing, because basically you're plugging holes on a sinking ship. Not that Home Games is sinking. I mean, like, literally, like, because people are like constantly trying to break stuff, both on purpose and on accident.
Yeah, for sure. It's I think I'll probably at some point after the kind of initial launch of this, I'll spend a good amount of time just trying to break it, just trying to do things that I shouldn't be able to do, and then kind of just iterate from there to make it better. Real quick, also, I was going to say, just for safety things, so on this machine that's going to be running Homedome, it needs to be as kind of quarantined from the world as possible. If someone tries to access the file system or the network, we should be able not only to block them from it, but in case we can't block them, like, we need kind of a backup, like a fail-safe, whatever. So basically, one way that we can do that is shutting down outbound HTTP access, which is pretty easy. So we can disallow any HTTP calls, so it can't talk to anything. And then the other thing would be basically making sure that if it can access the file system, there's nothing valuable on the file system. So one way I thought of doing this was Lambda. Lambda is so abstracted, like I don't even have access to the machine that it runs on. It's just so out there. It's just a thing. It is just the logic. So if I can have this checking stuff in just the logic so magically far away, that would be great. But basically setting up system dependencies on Lambda is a pain in the ass, because Lambda runs on Amazon Linux 2, which is Amazon Linux was like a fork of CentOS, or CentOS, which is like Red Hat Enterprise Linux is like the premium version of CentOS, and then Amazon Linux is like a fork of CentOS, and then Amazon Linux 2 is an iteration on Amazon Linux. But you could still run CentOS stuff on it basically and act like it's the same thing. Anyway, so because of that, when you want to have a system dependency, like for example strace, which you would get through Yum, which is the package manager on CentOS based OSs, you would do like Yum install strace, and then that installs all of these dependencies and gives you a binary in your user bin whatever directory on your machine called strace that you can run. Basically, I need to run that CLI command from a Python process, or a Node, whatever process, and Lambda, but currently it's Python for Homedome. At least my test Lambda thing is, or was. And basically, it took me like 6 hours to get all the dependencies I needed to manually. I needed to get an Amazon Linux 2 EC2 instance, SSH into it, and then build from source the strace stuff, and then get all of those system dependencies and shared object files and all these C dependencies into the Lambda deployment bundle for my Python script to reference those system dependencies basically and have it all work. Only for me to be disappointed in the end, because if you try to run strace on Lambda, you run into an error that completely just blocks like the underlying system call that it's making, like on a like a kernel level or whatever. It's telling you you're not allowed to. And I think that's just a limitation of whatever container it's running in Lambda. I don't know the specifics of how Lambda works, but looking up the error message, I was just getting a bunch of people saying that they were seeing that in Docker. So I don't know what limitation we have in Lambda, but it seems to be the same as Docker. And we don't, like I said earlier, we don't have access to that machine and that kind of configuration. So I just think that we're stuck there. So I need to find out a way to set up Homedome on an EC2 instance, because we'll have access to the system dependencies and stuff there. Pain in the ass, but
Here's what we do. We go out into the desert with a Raspberry Pi.
That's it. That's our Homedome service.
That's the Homedome service. It's just a Raspberry Pi in the desert. Can't make network requests when there is no network. 5 head.
If we had a real
That
office, I would love to have an actual like Homedome, an instance, like one of the servers in our fleet or whatever is just a Raspberry Pi that actually is under a dome. That would be pretty great.
Oh, dude, I was gonna say we'd have to get the prop dome and everything, and then when people come in to like the way I imagine it was people come in to interview, would point at that and be like, "Never touch that, you'll die."
It's just overheating and shit because there's nowhere for the air to escape. Be awesome.
I'd be kind of into it. Yeah, I mean, this sounds like you're not just making an antivirus. I mean, on like a fundamental level, you're trying to track down and prevent people from doing malicious stuff online, which is never worked out before. But I think we can get it as close. I think the thing is, right? I don't think it'll ever be perfect, right? It's impossible for it to be perfectly safe all the time, 100%. But what we could get it is safe enough, and I think that is. I think you are a very smart guy, and I think you can get it to be safe enough, if that makes sense.
No, yeah, I agree. It's kind of like making something not impossible, but so hard to the point where they don't really want to. Like I once tried to write a bot that would buy shoes on Nike.com for me, but after fucking around with their login form and their like hidden fields and shit for like 45 minutes, I decided it was probably possible, but I didn't want to do it because it wasn't really worth it. And I think that's kind of the goal, because nothing is really impossible with this stuff. You can always figure out a way to break it. It's just, come on. Like, you want someone to be like, come the fuck on.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I was going to say something else and then I forgot. Shit. Anyway, yeah, whatever. That was the point. Making it hard to not want to do it. But it is going to be kind of a difficult thing. I think parsing the strace output won't be hard if we can just do like read line of the standard out and then just basically check that against a certain list, a set of kind of blocked system commands or system calls. It's just that, like you said, the tricky thing will then become hiding that logic, making sure that stuff isn't executed unless something happens that isn't caught in the automated testing. And then if that happens, then kind of how do we automate against that? Do we do something where we can tell that there's a certain code coverage? Like with testing libraries, you can get, this is the percentage of lines in your code that's covered by your tests. So if you can say that I did these things and not all of your lines were executed, you have to fix your test, but then that means we'd have to require 100% line coverage, and that just seems stupid. Yeah.
So here's what I was gonna say too is because we want this to like be not executable, no one's gonna be playing the game. So there's a way to get super close to 100% line coverage and still sneak something through.
Yeah.
So I think I think you're right about making Homedome as it'll boot your game up. It'll run like a set series of things. Like we need to be able to like say like, okay, a player needs to be able to join. So that needs to happen. So we're going to call your join player. We're going to call like the join code and see what happens from there. But I think that we're going to need to have like you said, like you or me, or hopefully if we become bajillionaires, somebody else, some poor soul will have to do this too, is just like look at the code. And then I think if we kept like a running list of like, this is going to cause a problem, we might be able to come up with a like reverse engineer, like a static analysis tool basically of code to say like, hey, these were things that we caught. This is like our list that we're going to just like automatically test against. And then Homedome can just have that as part of it before it even boots it up. It just runs the static analysis tool. It says like, hey, I caught these 3 things, back to the person, like you fail. And then it'll boot it up, see what happens. Then either they pass or fail. And then it comes to us to review. And then we'll go from there. I don't know that in my head, I think that's as close to safe as safe gets.
Yeah, we can keep iterating on the automation stuff as we get more examples, but at the end of the day, we will always need humans to check that stuff because that's just what it is.
Yeah, I'm gonna try to sneak something in on every one of my games now.
It's like a pretty big red flag if there's like a 7,000 line change and 6,000 lines of it are like re-implementing file system access. It's like,
True. I don't know. I mean, there's like the code obfuscation challenge every year, I think, and somebody did Hello World in C, and it was like 400 lines of code.
I believe
so. I mean, that was on purpose, but listen, some people just go out of their way to make their own life difficult. Like they'll write code that just is not efficient at all, and then it'll be like 6K lines when it could have been like a couple for loops.
Well, this actually opens up this question now of what if someone writes code that's just so fucking atrocious that we literally can't understand it, and we can't even know if it's gonna do sketchy shit. Like we probably can. I guess what I'm saying is that there's no real hard definition of what that is, and it's totally possible that someone could just put it out, something unreadable, and we would have to say like your code is so bad your game can't be published.
Bro, I don't see. That's the thing is I don't know. I think the only way to get around it would be like, I think maybe we should have like types of flags. Like this one, we don't know. So like we're gonna have to like go out into the desert and play this one on like a throwaway computer. We don't know what's gonna happen. Huh?
And shrooms.
Yeah, and shrooms,
yeah,
and then we'll come back maybe.
Computer.
Shrooms, a Raspberry Pi, and enough wires to get the rest of us.
Yeah, whatever it is, it'll be an interesting. What? Did you drop your mic?
Yeah, the mic.
Okay, dropped his mic. That's okay. Whatever it is, it'll be an interesting thing. I think a lot of this will always just be the human process that we haven't really seen yet because we haven't had a lot of other humans that aren't us interacting with this thing. So once that stuff starts to happen, it'll kind of inform a lot of the automation that we've tried to build up to this point, thinking that that's what we would need, and maybe we didn't, and whatever, we'll see what we need. And I didn't talk long enough for him to fix the mic, so I'm going to keep it going a little bit longer so I don't need to cut this part out. I guess just briefly I'll talk about the Lambda strace thing again. One of the tough things about that was that they really don't like to tell you that it's running on Amazon Linux. It's kind of like if you use this runtime environment, like for example Python 3.8, then you can Google stuff and then eventually find out that that's AL2, but it's not super easy to even find that info to then go and start getting your system dependencies. And 3 years is a super long time in documentation, so a lot of the documentation is outdated and doesn't work anymore. So it was just a super pain in the ass trying to get that system dependency installed, only to realize that it was never even permitted in the first place.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, now I can. Perfect timing.
All right, perfect. I don't know what happened there. I'm glad the mic is okay. Jesus Christ.
Well, I guess it's kind of perfect timing because I'm out of stuff to talk about.
Perfect.
Are you also out of stuff to talk about?
I think I am out of stuff to talk about.
Great. Well, then in that case, I will say that, as always, our music is done by our friend Tynan. He is Nitan on Bandcamp. That is Nitan, Nytan. Our website is homegames.io. Our Twitter is @homegames.io. You can send us a tweet. Let us know what you think about pretty much whatever. We also have a contact form on the website, homegames.io, if you want to reach out to us through there. You don't need an account or anything to do that. We also have an email address, podcast@homegames.io, if you would like to be featured on the podcast with a question or comment or anything like that. Thank you, everybody, for listening.
If you're like a cybersecurity person and you know what the heck you're talking about, maybe reach out, because Joseph and I are like, yeah, this could probably catch stuff. I don't think either of us actually has ever done anything cybersecurity-wise.
If you haven't cringed so hard that you launched out of your seat and you've made it this far through the podcast, cybersecurity experts, yeah, please let us know what the hell we are doing, because we don't know. Thanks for listening. We'll see you in 2 weeks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.